After all this, you still...
I still want that ghastly yes, and you had better deliver.
This is Greenhouse Gaslighting, a free and independent podcast discussing society and culture with a left-wing, down-to-earth perspective. If you've ever wanted a deep dive on the issues, but felt like the bar for entry was too high, then you're in the right place. Well, welcome back to the Greenhouse, dear listeners. We'll be taking a much-needed break of political coverage with our Movie Magic segment. I have on returning guest, friend of the show, Anand at Decrepit Zoomer. Welcome back.
It's very nice to be back. It's also very nice to be discussing this movie we'll be discussing here today.
Yeah, and I think I really put it in my top 10 Bollywood movies of all time. I don't know if that's too high. I think like if there's one film to show people who are beginners to the genre or people who like just don't know where to start or just what's like representative of the best of it, this kind of has to be it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in my top 10, I mean, there are a lot of great films, but like, I will say this, it's definitely in my top 3 Shah Rukh Khan films, for sure. It's definitely,
For sure.
if somebody was to say, like, okay, show me, like, list out 4 Shah Rukh Khan films that, like, I, who have never seen any SRK films before, like, what I should watch, this would definitely be one of them. I don't know what the other 3 would be. I feel like this would be one of them. I feel like I would have to put Om Shanti Om or 2. Maybe, and the other 2, I'm just kind of like up in the air. I'll have to think about that later.
Facts. Actually, it's good you bring that up because I've been doing like a Bollywood night thing with friends of mine, and what I've been trying to push for are like the hood classics, so to speak. So some of those classic SRK films have been making the screenings. Obviously, I need to go further back, and I think for a lot of us in the South Asian diaspora, this particular genre style of film is really center stage. I'm just gonna call it Yash Raj Industrial Complex for the time being.
That's a good way of putting it.
That when people think Bollywood, I think within the diaspora or even like outside of it, that kind of is I guess not contemporary standard, but like the kind of poster child of it, of these sets, these very melodramatic plots, quote unquote family friendly entertainment. But it is a very particular style, and I think it had a lot of holding power from like the mid 90s to like mid 2000s.
No, yeah, you're about late 80s, because it kind of like, because like he was obviously big in like the 70s. He had Diwar, Kabhi Kabhi, Silsila, right? Or Silsila came out in
Yeah.
1980, but like he kind of like had this period here where he was kind of like he sort of like deviated from his kind of like melodrama romantic format and kind of started making like very generic sort of action films. Some of them are pretty solid, I will admit, but then he kind of like had his like big comeback, so to speak, with 1989 Chandni. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's with Sri Devi and Rishi Kapoor.
I have not.
Yeah, great movie. Definitely should watch that one.
Solid. Yeah, so I think as a defining style, because I think the big ones that fit this frame of reference, I think like Kushi Kabhi Gum, Veer-Zaara. I'm trying to think what else are like the real Yash Raj like hood classics.
I mean, Chandni, Lamhe, Diwar. I would say those are kind of like the big ones. At least when people think of like Yash.
That's for sure. And maybe this is just my limited experience, or like this is just me as a normie. Like once you brought Shah Rukh Khan into the mix, this guy was like a industry carrying figure for a bit. And I think like
I mean,
you had these.
he still very much is. He still very much is.
Oh yeah. I I'm trying to think like what like the defining characteristics of this style are. Because it is a certain there's a certain consistency to it.
That like Veer-Zaara, the reason, and we're actually going to talk a little bit more about the specifics later, but I think you could argue that Veer-Zaara is kind of like the culmination of like the Yash Chopra aesthetics, right? I would argue it's definitely aesthetics at its peak, right? Obviously, this sort of love letter, to Punjab, right? This kind of use of environments and like sort of, I would argue, to open almost utopia-esque sort of like view of India, right? Or at least his not a view of India, but at least his kind of vision of India, right? That's all obviously we'll see is very much, not true, right? I also think kind of like politically, it's definitely kind of I would argue, the culmination of a lot of his aesthetics, specifically the part that he himself is Punjabi. He was born in pre-partition, Lahore, right? And he very much has a lot of sort of roots in the region, right? And like a lot of his films can be almost read as love letters to Punjab, but like very much this one is the love letter to Punjab, if he ever had to like pick one.
That's 100% spot on, and I think it's good you bring up that point because the impact of partition is a mainstay, personally and culturally for so many South Asian people, right? If you're not Punjabi, it may have affected your family to some extent. Like I know on some parts of my family, way. So I remember just being like really young when this movie came out. I didn't watch it, but I can remember like I think it was my parents and like a bunch of like the aunts and uncles just like doing a screening of it on like a really in their house in Lucknow, and it was I kind of remember their experience of it. When I ever saw it, I think I didn't really watch it until I was much older. For the first time, like a couple of the scenes of them getting reunited were so poignant that like the entire room of like stern faced, just very abrasive and like the North Indian stereotype just crumbling watching this movie, just being overtaken by the emotionality of it. The impact it had on my relatives has always been lasting to me. That really real painful memories, and even this like you could even criticize the film as being very saturated to a point, brings those feelings to such a fore, in a positive sense, right? Impact cannot be understated, and I think it's important to kind of recenter this film in a modern context. Nationalistic tensions have worsened globally, and borders and a kind of right-wing obsession with national identity reckoned with in modern political discourse. So a film like this, even if it's utopian, simplistic, or sad, had a lot of staying power back then, and I think it's relevant to bring it up now as well.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I think it must be said, this is not a movie that would be made today. I really don't think it is. It's I think post 2014, it's impossible to kind of portray Pakistan or Pakistanis without having them be like very like stereotypical, like over the top villains, right? And along with sort of having like a very overt nationalist message. And you could argue with this film, there's a bit of a subtext of nationalism kind of going on behind the scenes, but I think it's a lot less hostile, or at least you could argue it's definitely not nearly as hostile as it would have been if it was made today.
Right, and it also is a product of its time. I don't recall all the specifics, but but there was definitely a warmer mood, especially back then, about often personal relations, even if they couldn't be reconciled politically between Indians and Pakistani people, right? And I think films like this, or even like Mehuna, to like, even though that's like more of a subtextual issue of the themes were being explored in the cultural zeitgeist. And I don't know if that's the case today.
Oh, it's funny you bring up Mehuda because that movie would definitely not be made today. Because if I remember correctly, the
Absolutely.
villain in the story is not a Pakistani. The villain in the story is like a right-wing nationalist Indian who like wants to sabotage like an India-Pakistan peace deal. If I remember correctly, right?
Yeah,
That's like the
that is
okay, yeah.
exactly the
That
case. And
movie.
like I think, not to spoil that film, but like Shah Rukh Khan, who's the protagonist again in that, consequence of that and the start of the movie. It's a that is the plot entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, great movie by the way. Highly recommend it. It's like it is like one of those like I think like once you really get into it, like you get into the movie. Like at first, like when you hear about the plot, you're like roll your eyes, but like trust me, like about halfway in it, you're going to be like really into the movie. Like it's
Yeah,
I
that
don't want
one's
to
also a
like
hood classic.
I really don't want to give too much away, but it's amazing. It's wonderful. I love that movie so much.
Very much a product of its time, and I think like, if anyone's nostalgic for that or is just curious, it's definitely one of the hood classics in my view.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, I'm trying to think. Do you remember anything about this film when it came out? I know you might have, we were both super young that time, but you might have been younger.
No, I really don't. I mean, to be honest with you, like at least in my childhood, it's just this movie didn't really take on like a new meaning or whatever until like I would argue my late teenage years when I kind of like rewatched it because for the most part it was just like another SRK film, right? You know,
Yeah.
we rewatched this, we rewatched Mehuna, we rewatched Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, we rewatched Kaho Na Ho, we rewatched My Name Is Khan. You know, like it was just like simply another SRK film.
Yeah, and I think like I watched this with that same group I was telling you about, probably in October, November last year, and with this was in mixed company, so I would say like I'm the only Indian person there. Everyone either not Indian or is like from the subcontinent, but not Indian explicitly, right? So that experience company was also just like really impactful, that like this film can speak to people from various backgrounds, even though it's a very Punjabi oriented film, right? It has that universality to it, and also the kind of staying power it has in the diaspora. Like, I had a lot of friends who were Bangladesh, and they're just like, "Wait, I've heard all these songs growing up. How did I not know it was this movie?" So, yeah, it has significant staying power.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I mean, because like I mean, I don't really think it can be read as like a parable about India and Pakistan in the same way like let's say other films sort of like that are kind of about like the similar cover the similar themes about like partition and like relationships between India and Pakistan can be. But fundamentally, I think it really does touch upon many ways in which it like questions it's like well can there ever be really like a positive relationship between the two countries and to the two peoples considering the fact that both countries subsist and exist upon or like sustain themselves upon like the other's like inherent or the inherent view of the other country as like your enemy, and I think this movie kind of like touches upon that, and I think it definitely has a far more optimistic view of things, whereas other films definitely have far more pessimistic views regarding the two countries.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think like the defining film prior to this was like something like Gadar, and I haven't seen, but that one kind of really highlights the pessimistic view, and that's based on actual tragedies. To have something that's kind of set well after the fact and in the reconciliation and healing, it speaks to an attitude that's just like it's just missing today.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that like the partition film in general has kind of become like its own genre at this point in both India and Pakistan, in Pakistan,
Mhm.
right? Like, I mean, arguably, like probably the best one I think is Ganam Hava. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I have not.
Yeah, it's like 1974. It's stars Balraj Sahni. It's directed by Emma Satyu. It's like about like a Muslim Indian in like post-partition India, like I think like I want to say like 5-ish years after partition, right? It's kind of like looking at like how it's almost like what it feels like to be a minority in your own homeland when right like next
Yeah.
to you is a country which is supposed to be your quote unquote homeland, and as such, it's always going against you. You know, a great movie, very depressing, but I highly recommend it. It's like kind of, I would argue, again, I always hate to say this, but it is its own subgenre at this point. The partition film. I would argue Gundam Hava is like kind of like the definitive partition film.
Hmm. And to bring up sacred games, like every time I'm on this podcast, I'm always bringing it up. I feel like, but to understand that successful, if limited, web series as a piece of partition media as well, um, as a conspiracy thriller, um, is also just it cannot be understated, right? That across world history and in contemporary politics, anywhere British people drew a line, there has been unspeakable tragedy ever since, right?
Yeah, absolutely,
um,
absolutely.
I can recall like visiting relatives in India, unfortunately, on the more reactionary to say about Israel and Palestine, and I think I just was like, okay, you got a lot to say. Do you know what the Balfour Declaration was? Do you know about Sykes-Picot? No. What about? And then I really just had to hammer down. What about the Radcliffe line? Even within like contemporary India, people just I memory hold it or just are willfully ignorant. So that's my gripe. But like
Oh,
it is
yeah,
just it's very important to examine these histories, and then also how do we reconcile from that? That's very important to me, at least.
absolutely, absolutely. All
So
right, do you want to jump into like the film itself now? Let's because
yeah,
it
I think
feels like I think the listeners now really want to like. All right, they've been talking about like the themes for a while. Let's like get into what the film is.
yeah. Let's jump into it. So I think um the plot summary first, or maybe let's talk about the composition and stuff.
Yeah, sure. Well, something I really do want to like start off with,
Yeah.
as with like all Bollywood films, I think outsiders are always like, "What about the music?" It's like I always forget just how great the music of this film is every time I like come back to it. You know, because it doesn't
Okay.
really have, it does not have like those same like I think recognizable hits that like everybody kind of like remembers. Like for example, take DDLJ, which is like another which is an Aditya Chopra directed film. And technically, even though this one's directed by Yash Chopra, Aditya Chopra did like write the screenplay, but whatever. Like DDLJ, like everybody's talking about like all the hits they can remember that song, like Bandid Laga Ke Rakana, or
Yeah.
um, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't really think Veer-Zaara has like that, like one recognizable song where when somebody mentions the movie, they're like a tune goes off in their head. You know what I'm saying?
I think like if kind of been memory hold or you just like haven't heard it in a while, it is a bit lost. And there's a kind of eerie quality to the music that I'm gonna get to because I forgot to add that to the outline, but it's very good you bring that up. Um, One funny note about the music production actually is composer Madan Mohan's had these lost tracks from like I want to say the 50s or so, or maybe the remember what year, but like these tunes and melodies were like a scrapped project he had abandoned, I think, before his death. And then his son finds them, and then like if you re-listen to them, it's like, wait, this is like the entire soundtrack. So like I think 11 tracks from this lost tape got reused to build out the soundtrack for this movie. So it does have that weird like forgotten ghost quality to it, like you're mentioning, as part of the production. But after having rewatched the movie, like even though like um the soundtrack can kind of get memory hold, it is very iconic to me at least. I think like to have a mix of kind of Punjabi folk music, kind of like very sweeping melodramatic Bollywood classic stuff, but also to like work in like the
Yeah.
Qawwali, which is like very just endemic to the subcontinent. I don't really think that style of music exists outside of it, right? It's a
Yeah.
very unique one.
And like, I don't know why we Bollywood stopped having filmy qualities. Because oh my god, this is one of the better ones, man. I love, like, I'm a sucker for a quality in like any Bollywood film. Like, I will sit through like a 3 hour like dog shit fest from the 50s if there's like one good quality song.
Oh
Okay, like
yeah,
that
oh
is like
yeah.
the type of person I am. Like, if I find out that there's like a quality song in like a 3 hour dog shit film, I will watch the entire film just for that one quality, and I'll say it was worth it because of that one quality. I love film qualities. They're not, because obviously, they're less sort of like in terms of like regular quality performances, they're like less improvised and they're more like, what I guess what term is like they're more sort of crisp. They're more clean. And obviously, you could argue, well, one of the beauty of like a lot of qualities is the improvisation, kind of the fact it can become like three, four qualities in one, in the span of an hour. Like, I don't know how many of our listeners would be familiar with quality in general, but like, if
They
you
gonna
are,
learn today.
like, yeah, go on YouTube, look up Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan live, and like go through all of that, whatever. But the point being is like film qualities, they really don't exist anymore. At least I can't remember like a recent Bollywood film or just a recent like film, Indian film in general that has a quality in it. So like when like that song hits, Aaya Tere part in this film, it's like, oh my god, it's the greatest thing. I love it so much.
I was just gonna get to that too because between that and May Yahahu, which is like the one that plays at the wedding, I had that was is probably like, in the film, not only because it like really harkens back to just very classic rough and tumble Qawwali style music. It's also taking place at like a very pivotal scene in the movie. And like the style of the song is really like professing like emotions, the real like decision that has to be made, and like this confrontation of the truth. While maybe I mean, spoilers ahead if you didn't know, too late. Um, the scene is like she's walking into like her engagement ceremony.
Zara,
Eh, Zara,
Zara,
yeah,
Zara, that is, by the way, yeah.
yeah. Zara's walking into her engagement ceremony, and there's this big like show of circumstance. It's like raining. I This is like a real type of building that's actually used, but like there's this like water walkway type deal going. Have the band just like going ham on this little island in the water basically, and it's like this rising music to like the emotionality, and then Shah Rukh Khan shows up out of the blue as the music crescendos, and it's so well done. And I think like there's this dismissive approach to music numbers are done in Bollywood, both internally in Bollywood as well as like by foreign observers, where it's just like, oh, it's just this big like spectacle. You get a couple, you get a dance out of it, and then you kind of just like proceed with the movie. Whereas I think this speaks to like an older style of not just film in India, but even like harkening back to dramatic traditions within the subcontinent. Music, dance, and acting don't have to be seen as separate disciplines, but rather part of an integral whole. And you can use
No,
music to build out expositions. You can use song numbers to build out the plot, rather than it just being a distraction from the film as a whole.
yeah, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. But like it plays almost like a Greek chorus, which I really think
Yeah,
hammers home the whole melodrama aspect of it, especially the song "Ayatera Dar part," and it's used twice. Once in that sequence, right, with that big reunion, dramatic reunion, right, and then the second time, uh, a little bit later, when Shah Rukh Khan's character has to make a very tough decision, which we'll get to later in the podcast. But it truly is like it's perfect. It's I don't really know how else to describe it. Like at that point in the film, like you're already very much, I would say involved, in like these characters in their lives. But like at that moment when that music starts happening, and like it kind of plays out like a Greek chorus with both not only Veer but also Zara, right? Talking about like their love for each other and just ultimately their eventual reunion. It's perfect. It's like it's just like you said, it crescendos perfectly into them embracing. Really like I don't know. Yeah, I can't really say enough about how much I love the song and the moment of the film.
I think it harkens to the entire, there's two mixed elements here, right? And I think quality to Indian, well, I mean, let's not even say Indian, let's just say like South Asia as a whole, right? Where it's like, I know that people will probably kill me for this view, and I don't care, but you know, it is kind of trite to assume that you can fully separate groups in India in like discrete contexts, like into Muslim blocks. And I think like with sectarian politics as they are now, people are trying to do that historical and also kind of unrealistic way to look at things in my personal view, right? You can't really about, let's just say North India specifically, right? Without talking about, influence of the Sufi tradition. You can't talk about it without the Persian influence, art on a lot of things. You can't talk about you can't Sikhism as a separate institution from Hinduism, right? How do you talk about um, which literally means like land of five rivers, right? It exists at an intersection of several things. And India is that to me, right? It's where multiple things are true, not where things are discrete. And I think that's something that should be celebrated rather than erased from the public consciousness. And that's where the film succeeds, also where the film is trying to make several cogent points at once, where Pakistan and India were split along Punjab, and that also leads to several severed threads that need to be reconnected in some way. People, the film is basically trying to say that like if two people can notice that, you would start something bigger. But two people doing it is also very significant in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess
We
wise,
should totally get
I'll
into
try
that.
to,
I was
sorry,
saying we
what?
should get into the cast. We should get into the cast before we.
Yeah, let's do the cast. That's probably gonna play
Yeah,
out better. So um SRK legend as squadron leader Veer Pratap Singh. He plays like a rescue pilot more than anything else. We have Preeti Zinta as Zara Hayat Khan, who's kind of this I wouldn't say heiress, but she's like a very influential politician in Pakistan. Who else is critical? You have Amitabh Bachchan in supporting roles. You've got Kiran Kher as uh honestly, I don't think there was anyone who was bad at a casting level at any point. So Manoj Bajpayee as Raza
pre
Shirazi.
games of us, pre games of
Yeah,
us,
pre was it?
Manoj Bajpayee. Yeah, I got to be honest. Like I was rewatching this. Like I rewatched it a few years ago. And then like Manoj Bajpayee showed up. I was like, wait, he's in this movie? I completely forgot he was in this
Yeah, and
movie.
he
It
did an
was like such.
excellent job.
Oh yeah, he's phenomenal. I love Manoj Bajpayee.
Which yeah, like I think his character is supposed to be like the son of this equally influential Pakistan Is he like an intelligence asset or something like that? I forgot what his like specific career was.
He's literally, I think, just like a son of like the politician. That's literally it. I don't think there's anything more to it. He just has influence, which is, I think, really all you as a viewer really needs to know.
Yeah, I mean he does something like really sus like in the middle of the movie. The joke I was making when I was watching this with my friends is like, yep, he was definitely in the CIA. That was my little joke when I was watching it, but
Oh yeah, for sure. You just know he was definitely like one of those assets that they had in like Pakistani government, right?
yeah.
I don't know. That would be actually pretty cool if that was like actually a plot point in the movie. But oh, whatever. We can assume, right? Because it's like the
It's very
80s.
reasonable.
So I mean, it's not like like a crazy thing to like think.
Definitely. And I don't think there were really any weak points from any of the cast, to be honest. I think everyone was
Yeah, I
giving
will
their best.
I will admit, I think and we'll get to the plot a little bit later. I can discuss this more. I think Anupam Kher, I mean, yeah, he's good, but like I did not care for him. I feel like it was just like, oh, Anupam Kher's in this, and it's like he's kind of, I hate to say it, but it kind of feels like he was phoning it in, you know?
I mean, especially like court dramas or just like I haven't seen a lot of like legal dramas in Hindi cinema. I could stand to grow a little bit there, but you are spot on because I think.
Well, the thing is,
Oh, I forgot to mention Rani Mukherjee, Pakistani lawyer. I forgot to mention that.
yeah. Well, I think the whole like plot point of like the sort of the legal drama and all that stuff. It's definitely not something. For one thing, it's not something that is unheard of in a Yash Chopra film. There are many points where he likes to like sort of throw in these sort of type of subplots. Most famously, or at least the one that I can remember, is in the his film Vakil. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like came out in the '60s. There's like a whole subplot in that film which involves like a legal drama. In this case, I believe it's kind of also like perhaps it's referring to the film Avada. I don't know if you've seen that. That's another
I
classic,
have
by the way,
not.
probably one of my favorite films. Great movie, but like a large part of that film revolves around a court case, because it's kind of like a frame story with like the beginning and like ending happening in a courtroom. So I guess it's kind of like sort of a throwback to that in some ways. But I think while it does work excellently in Avada and the way they sort of incorporate it, this one it kind of just feels, at least sort of like the extended scenes with Anupam Kher as a lawyer versus like Rani Mukherjee. I couldn't really care for it as much.
Yeah, I think like Rani Mukherjee does a better job than in Anupam Kher in the court scenes. Also, it should be kind of stated that like the court drama, if anyone was looking for like, ooh, is it going to be a good legal thriller? Definitely more device than anything else. I wouldn't
It's
put
like
too much.
30 minutes. 30 minutes of
Basically,
like a 3-hour film. So I wouldn't put much into it.
it's also crazy because like his wife is also playing a major character in the film, and like say what you will about Karen Kara, at least like she doesn't phone it in nearly as much as Anupam does. But also like Anupam Kher,
Yeah.
like now that we'll get into it. I mean, his right wing politics aside, right outside of the film,
Oh,
and it
for
always just
those who
gets
don't
tight.
know, he's like a major fascist. Well, probably arguably like the most outspoken, at least one of the more outspoken fascists in Bollywood, even though there are many. But like, he's like, how there are like a lot of people who just know they're doing it because they're like the party in power and they just don't want to make it like a whole deal. So they always say like positive things about Modi and like the BJP, right?
Oh, he's been a
Like that's something that
long time booster for the party.
yeah, no, Anupam Kher 100% like through and through is like a Sangi, I can like we could talk about it like more, but it's not really worth it. But yeah, just as like an aside, I feel like it's important to know.
Oh, like because of that, he kind of typecasts himself into like these very conservative dads. And there used to be a place for it in like 90s Bollywood family dramas of like you just need an older guy to be the dad, kind of a secondary antagonist. So he's done that role
Yeah.
so many times that it's just like I don't know meaningfully contributes to Bollywood films sometimes. And I know like typecasting's
Yeah.
more common in Bollywood as an industry than anything else, but I don't know if you've seen this. Like, this is just another aside. Like, Nasiruddin Shah has basically said like Anupam Kher sucks. Fan. There's nothing to be said about him. He's not a good actor.
Oh yeah, no, they were like, because they used to be like really good buddies, and now like
Oh
they
my-
like that's where they shot like fucking despises them. But like this also like I feel like this is also important. It's like I think like one of the reasons he's also in this film is just because Anupam Kher is like a huge sort of Yash Chopra collaborator. He's like been in like many of his movies, Chandani, Lamhe. What else? Okay, I'm kind of
Kuch Kuch
blanking.
Hota Hai.
Oh, Kuch Kuch Hota. Kuch Hota Hai is not Yash Chopra, is it?
Oh, it's not. Oh, my bad.
It's
My
a.
bad.
Is it that it's Aditya Chopra, or no? It's Karan Johar. It's Karan Johar. What am I saying? But it's
I get them
definitely
mixed
a
up.
young.
My bad. My bad.
I believe he was the producer though. But yeah, anyways, he's like a huge sort of collaborator with Yash Chopra and like a lot of the sort of like Yash Raj sort of people in general.
Yeah, I think he's, and at least he's not playing a major role. So even if he's phoning it in, like only there to kind of carry the plot along for Rani Mukherjee's character. What about Rani Mukherjee in that sense? Is she just kind of like another Greek chorus or like audience stand-in?
I don't know. It's not like I think because she also has her own subplot going on about like trying to like fulfill her father's wishes, right? And like trying to prove herself and like as being like a female lawyer and like a otherwise like a world sort of like where which is not all that kind to like women in that field, right? So that's kind of like going for it. I think Rani Mukherjee does like a good enough job to the point where I'm fine with it. Like it's some of the lines it like feels like it is kind of like a stand-in for the audience. It's like, oh my god. But like it works. It works. It really does work, I think, once you get into it.
Yeah, I think the only point to note is like this is her first case in the film. So for her to take on this big dramatic case is just classic Bollywood magic. But I think like yeah, the courtroom stuff is kind of A plot, but the B plot is well actually that's the B plot. So the A plot is almost entirely in flashback.
Yeah.
And I think it's told from SRK's character's perspective. So to kind of quickly parse the plot as fast as I can. As part of this goodwill project between Pakistan and India, they're reviewing cases on some of their Indian prisoners. She gets the case and recognizes from the jump that this man has been imprisoned under a false identity and false pretenses. Finds out that he used to be a search and rescue guy with the Indian Air Force. And they go through the backstory. He had helped out Zara.
You have to say his full name, by the way. You have to say his full name.
Veer-Pratap Singh. Exactly.
Yeah. If there was like ever like a name for like somebody to be like a hero in a Bollywood film, that's like the name, Veer-Pratap Singh. For those of you who don't know,
exactly.
Like, hero like 3 times.
Oh, also, and he had like the blonde in his center part. It was a very like dated look. Oh my god.
It's SRK. It works.
It works. So he kind of comes in at a point where Zara is she's the daughter of an influential Pakistani politician. She is engaged to the influential Pakistani politician. But she needs to go to India because I think her nanny was a Punjabi Sikh who ended up on the Pakistan nanny and is basically saying like, hey, I'm not long for this world. Can you carry back to Punjab and have them traditionally immersed in the Saltej River and as my last rites, Obliges. She does it under cover of darkness, much against her mother's wishes. And she needs to be bailed out. Veer because what is it? I think their bus crashes on like that.
Yeah, their bus crashes, and she pretty much is like, I think, straight, because it's like it like crashes off a sort of like cliff area, but it's like held to the but it's like sort of like stays in like this sort of like side area. It doesn't like go all the way off the cliff. It kind of like it falls onto this like ledge, and pretty much like it allows like them to be rescued and nobody gets hurt and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like this very big dramatic introduction of both of them. And this is actually shortly after her introduction where like the song number introducing her is her singing like I will never change and then immediately changes as soon as the song is over.
Yeah.
So
Sung
so
at
you know
this
he's
point, sung by the ageless Lata Mangeshkar. It's interesting because her voice, you could hear in the voice that's a bit of like an older sort of like
yeah,
woman, because like her voice at this point, you know, it has aged, but at the same point, that kind of adds to the charm of it. You know, like like obviously you're thinking, oh, maybe Chubby's a different singer, could easily be like a younger woman, but like I think having with Lata Mangeshkar, it adds to the charm of the film and to its aesthetic. I would argue.
in like this kind of timeless quality with some of the older music by having
Not
her
only
in the
that,
rep
but
like
not only that, but also the fact that Lata Mangeshkar being like a longtime collaborator with Yash Chopra, and you could argue that this was kind of like the culmination of like everything he's kind of worked towards this film, right? I would argue it was like it was definitely his like last great film. He did make more films after this, but it's his last great film. And I think like with Lata Mangeshkar doing the singing and all that stuff, it feels like it had to be her, and with her in it, it adds to the charm and the aesthetic of the film.
for sure, for sure. I'm trying to think. So yeah, they have this dramatic introduction and he's like berating her like why would you risk like your life like that? And it's revealed that like no, she's trying to carry out her nanny's last right. So for reasons I'm going to just condense it down. Um he decides with her along the way through Punjab. There's a beautiful song number like and it's incredibly like well executed. I was watching this like Sky was in the viewing with us and she's just like I have never seen colors executed so flawlessly on film like this. Especially like when people are complaining about how like color grading is so ass these days in like modern film and TV. So that those scenes um they carry out the last rites and there's this very touching scene where like he's like if they go to like this gurdwara to carry out the last rites, what if like the Gyani's very conservative and like tries to like tell her off? But they have this very touching scene where it's like the Gyani comes out and is like, you've done more for this person than even their own kids would. So like you have the right to carry this out. And they both like carry out the last rites in this very truly poignant but also very touching that they do it. And it also like begins to kind of blossom their relationship through of them carrying out this very, it speaks like the Sufi undertones of the film that it's not just that they share companionship or romantic interests. They're also like not only healing this rift of difference between Indians and Pakistanis, but they're also their shared homeland in some sense, and they're also carrying out these very spiritually significant tasks, right? Takes her back
Right.
to his village, and you have this kind of like subtext of like where he's from. His parents are well, not his adoptive parents. I think that's his aunt and uncle, right?
Yeah.
They've kind of like tried to modernize their little village as best they can, and directly challenges them on like, okay, you've brought these developments, but what about like educating girls? And then Amitabh Bachchan's character, who's like this kind of like, damn, she got my ass. Yo, Veer, I think you should get with her. But that's me trying to like summarize that
Yeah.
as best as I can. But all good things must come to
Yeah.
an end, and he has to take her back to the border where it's revealed actually I'm engaged. And he's like, ah, shit. So, her husband Raza is already like some not right, but we'll deal with this later. So we follow her back to Pakistan, and she's sprung. She's tripping. She's like, wait a minute, I was supposed to be with him, and I'm not ready to get married to this guy. So I think I forget which one comes first, Aaya Tere Darpar or Main Yahan Hoon Yahan. I'm trying to figure out which song comes first.
I'm pretty sure.
Okay, which
That's like
that one is a
more.
beautiful number. That one is beautiful. I really love. I really it's executed, but it's like psychologically interesting too because it's her engagement to Raza, and it's this big like display, elegantly done, but she's tripping because like she's seeing Veer like all through all through the hall when he's actually not there, and
It's
and
kind
like stressed because of that.
exactly. It's kind of like it's obviously kind of shown in the way that he's sort of haunting her, right? It's like the specter that won't let her go, right? And I think you could argue certainly that's also sort of reflective of like the Sufi themes that it got repeated throughout the film almost, right? At least in kind of like the sort of like spiritual ways it talks about love, it reflects love, and a lot of the lyrics kind of show this as well.
Right,
Great
and it's
number.
not like and it's not like a haunting where he's mad at her or like she's frightened by his presence, but more of like one that's genuinely happy for her in spite of what's going on, and she can't reconcile both things, and she's trying to like run from this revelation of like, no, I don't actually love this person I'm engaged to. Even though, like it's a politically significant thing for her parents and her fiance's parents. So her friend is like, "Yo, Veer, you need to pull up to Pakistan and get your girl. Like she's tripping." He shows up. Ayat Tere Darpar happens. Like this, the number we were
That's
talking
not
about
why
earlier.
he I'm sorry you misspoke. He shows up because her friend, uh as well as like she plays like a servant, or she's technically the servant, but she's really like her friend, and clearly they've known each other since childhood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Realizes this, and she reaches out to him, and it's like, listen, she's like heartbroken. She's in love with you. She's this, she's that, and that's where he decides to come to Lahore. And oh my god, I gotta say by the way, the way Lahore is like. Obviously, like environments and like the way Punjab is shown in general is like a huge part of this film, right? But it's true for both sides of the border, right? The Punjab that
Yeah.
they show on the Indian side of the border, along with the Punjab they show on the Pakistani side of the border, it's like very sort of like hyper stylized. Again, like I've said, we're going to continue to repeat this. Anybody who talks about this will repeat this. It's this love letter to Punjab, right? And I think it ultimately
Yes,
shows
yes.
that on both sides of the border, the beauty of it, the beauty of not only the land but of its people and of its culture, right? And Lahore is
Yeah.
just shown absolutely beautifully in this film.
100%, 100%. You really see that come to a head in how Ayat Tere Darpar, where like you have that like walk in of all the wedding guests in the rain. You have the band just during this Kawali, and um, I think like just like this lotus garden in the water. I forget what it is, but just
Yeah,
everything
yeah.
about it, beautiful, stunning. I
But
love it.
but also that because like the song like it starts because like it opens opening lyrics start with like Shah Rukh Khan like looking out at like the Lahore city, and then it cuts to like the wedding sequence, right? And then
Yeah,
that's when
yeah,
like
yeah.
the song really gets. So yeah, but no, you're right. It's absolutely the set design of the film is wonderful. It
Wonderful,
reminded
exactly.
me it reminded me a bit of Pakiza, which is I don't know if have you seen the movie? It's with Mina
I have
Kumar. It came
not,
out like in
no.
1972. Directed by Kamal Murray. That's a wonderful film. Which is like it's a courtesan film. Anyways, like the set design, especially in this sequence, it reminded me a bit of Pakiza, specifically with the song in Pakiza. If for any of the viewers or listeners have seen Pakiza, don't know what I'm talking about with the where it's like a very wonderful sort of set design where it's like outside and there's like this like sort of lotus garden and like this water and its use of water and reflections and all that stuff. It reminded me a lot of Pakiza.
Right, right. it's very beautiful imagery in that sense, 100%. And I think the use of rain in that song is prevalent too, because the quality is like it's emotional gushing. You cannot control the emotionality of the scene. I think like that overflow aspect represents like how this plot is coming to a head.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like they do reunite, they have these very touching moments, but her mother eventually like intervenes. It's like you need to get the fuck out of here. Like her father is so her father has brown dad syndrome where like he is so he's shitting and farting himself. He's going to die if he's any more stressed. And he's like, "Yo, you right. I need to get the fuck out of here." It's like, "Damn, I wasn't expecting you to be that chill." And he's like, "Well, you know, I'm a good boy at the end of the day." And she was like, "Damn, okay." But before he can go back to
Wait,
India, he's
you're
go ahead,
leaving
go ahead.
out. You're leaving out. Sorry, you're leaving out like the line, which is, where she's so shocked about the fact that he agrees so readily and all that stuff, and then
Oh yeah, say the
she
line, say the
says,
line.
"It's like, are all sons, are all sons in your country like you?" And he said, "I don't know, but I do know that all mothers from my country are like you." You know. So,
Ah, ah. Just
and I should
again,
have
like
said
this.
it. I should have said
I
it in
don't
Hindi,
remember the
but
exact line in Hindi either. I don't remember the exact line.
yeah, me neither. But yeah, the point being, that's kind of like the translation. It's very, very beautiful sequence. I think it goes to great lengths to not villainize, the Pakistanis in this film, like any of the characters, or Pakistan as a country, which I think is something which it seems so simple. Like, it's like, oh yeah, obviously, no shit, you wouldn't want to do that. But like, looking at films like post 2014 in India and like the way they like portray Pakistan and Pakistanis, it's like, oh my God, this is crazy. I can't believe that they're doing this. It really is ultimately, at least in my view of it, it very much is a rebuke and rejection of Indian nationalism, as well as Pakistani nationalism.
Exactly, and I think also like that style of flattening Pakistanis as villains. It's also like not even good at writing them as villains for that matter. They're always one dimensional, always like scheming henchmen with like threatening music in dark rooms, and just like very obvious like guys from the Hindi belts like forcing their kha sounds so it sounds like they're speaking Urdu. So like you're on there
Oh, also, you
100%.
forgot my personal favorite, like the fucking like eyeliner, like darkening their eyes to make them like seriously
God,
bored.
yeah, yeah. You're spot on there. Holy shit. Um so yeah, before he can go back to India, he's intercepted by the police and but Raza was there behind all of this saying, "Hey, you were trying to finesse my girl. I'm about to lock you the fuck up. I'm gonna lock you the fuck up, and the bus you were supposed to go back to India on, we're gonna blow it up on knows you're alive."
Oh, you didn't blow it up.
Oh no, it crashed.
No, it just crashed. Like that's he didn't do it. He had nothing to do with that. It just crashed.
Oh my bad, my bad. Yeah, you're right. So like he gets locked up, um, basically because he wants to protect Zara at the end of the day. Also, yeah, the bus gets crashes. It's lost in the all the passengers die in the process. So it's assumed he died, um, in transit on the way back.
Yeah, but reality is something different. And pretty much like the reason why it takes a deal is, I'm just gonna say the actor's name because I heard many characters name. He pretty much goes through like great lengths to say, I will make, Zara's life miserable, right?
Yeah,
Uh and yeah, so it's kind of like there's this decision, and this is, by the way, you'll see this a lot with many Indian films, but like the best ones in which the way they use it, and I would argue this is like one of the better ones in the way they use it. They then repeat the Aaya Tere part, song at that moment where it's like making the
yeah, they
decision. They say it
reprise it.
again.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's again, like I said, it's like a Greek chorus. That's why I really love the song. The way it's used, it's utilizes a Greek chorus, and it's like very much enhances the mellow drama of the film. Right. I think, especially in this scene, as he's sitting there, and then it's also intercut with scenes of like the wedding, along with the bus crashing as the song plays and it crescendos into finally its finale and its tragedy of him of showing why he was locked up for 22 years and his absolute, and how it's ultimately due to his, steadfast love for Zara, but nobody knows it. Everybody thinks he's dead. Everybody thinks he went
It,
back and he died in that bus crash.
exactly. I think we come back to the present after that, and Rani Mukherjee's character is like, okay, I need to find someone on the Indian side who can attest to his identity. So she goes back to his village, and kind of revealed that many years have passed. His uncle and aunt have passed at this point, but when she goes to their property, who else does she fucking find but Zara and her friend? And she's able to communicate to her that like Veer is alive in Pakistan and he needs your help. And
Yes. Like we find out that what happened was that when Zara found out that that plane bus had crashed,
yeah.
she along with his foster parents, thought that he died because he was on the bus, right? She ends up getting a divorce from Manoj Bajpayee's character, and her father ends up granting her permission. And obviously, because of that, her father's political career completely fizzles out. He dies a few years later, and then her mother dies shortly after.
And she's in India basically taking over. There's a subplot where like his aunt and uncle were dreaming of like more changes they could make to the village, like having a school for the girls and like these kind of social programs they were trying to do at a very like fundamental level. So she's like taking over that work for them. And it's very sweet, and I think it touches on this read that some have of this film of like, does Zara represent a kind of secularist or modernist feminist from Pakistan? I don't 100% know if that was the intent of the film or if that was the subtext Yash Chopra had, but I think that's the moment people are referring to when they make that read of the film. And
I
she's
think the
eventually
film. Sorry, I didn't interrupt,
go
but
ahead,
I
go
think
ahead.
that the film kind of goes through like great sort of like links to sort of portray this like village that Veer is from and his parents are his foster or I guess his adopted parents are in, as kind of like utopian sort of ideal of rural India, rural Punjab to be exact, right? Where
Yeah.
ultimately, they can modernize and secularize and as in this case sort of like pursue uh specifically modernization with regards to women's rights, because they do build a school for female for women, which was not there, which obviously as we saw earlier in the film that Zara was the one who pointed it out, right? And I think it kind of goes through great lengths to show the sort of like communal aspect of Punjab, which he kind of sort of sees as very utopian.
Yeah, and it's also like this kind of dream of the Indian political project independence where not necessarily enlightened individuals but more community minded um salt of the earth type people would take charge of their communities and kind of pull it out of the impoverished conditions created by colonialism. Again, I don't know if it's 100% always the case, compared to reality, but that is the kind of utopian subtext of the film.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So they eventually go back, um, and of course, I'm flatly summarizing now, like the last third of the film. I want to say because a lot of it is more so like emotional storytelling else, but Zara makes it back to Pakistan. She's able to testify to Veer's identity. The court decides that yes, Veer is innocent and should be released back to India. And I think the film ends with them, of course, happy, reunited, and ready to go back to India at the Wagah border cross. So that I think is the plot in its broadest strokes.
Yeah, pretty much. I think we touched upon everything. Minus, I would say, the B plot with the whole chorus sequence, but I don't really think we have to give the plot for that.
It's a very point and click with the core plot. It's a plot device for the rest.
Yeah, it's kind of used to sort of set up the framing story they want to tell.
So yeah, I mean, overall, what the film excels at is it does take that like saccharine Yash Chopra style of like very romantic storytelling, but it does set it in a very real context of partition. It sets it up subcontinental specific themes within Sufism, duty, sacrifice, all these classic themes, right? um I guess my always with this style of film, even though like I can say that I was moved and touched by it, and we talked at length about how the film is very sincere in this idea of mending the rift of partition and trying to heal these divides. Because I mean, again, this isn't exactly stated in the film. I don't think the religious backgrounds are as much of the opposition as national identity is. Like when they're bringing up, yeah, but he's Indian. Oh, but she's Pakistani. I don't think religion is the central divider in this case, but you can look events like partition as being incredibly foundational for not the root of sectarian violence, a major stumbling block or the state of sectarian violence in India today, right? People will cite the events of partition, whether or not it happened to their families personally, as the reasons they mistrust Hindus or Muslims in this case. But then, even at a national sense, that also plays into it. So, I guess the question is where did this pan out, and how did it work out for the film, you think?
I mean, it works pretty well, because I think it's interesting, like you said, that religion doesn't play as much of an aspect, although it's very clearly under the surface, as much as nationality does, right? Because the great crime with Zara being in love with Veer in her father's eyes is, oh my God, how can I be this great Pakistani politician whose daughter will be in love with the Indian, right? That's kind of the I would argue the problem that is sort of posed. Not that, oh, he's a non-Muslim, although I'm sure that kind of also plays a role, but overtly it's nationality which matters, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's, I think, what makes it very much a product of its time. Where, let's say you tried to make this today, the divide even be nationality, although that would factor into it heavily. It would specifically be religious in the modern context.
Interesting is typically it's partition when it's dealt with, it's overtly through religion. I mean, of course, nationality has always played a role. There's no way to avoid it, but it's overtly been mainly through religion, right? And I think,
Yeah,
if you really think about it, it is very religious when talking about Pakistan, and especially in the context of Indian nationalism. It is very much coded through religion. And it's like, well, they're Muslim, how can we trust them? And it's along with the fact that many Muslims are seen as Pakistani agents, quote unquote, in this country, and vice versa with, I believe, the Hindu sort of minority in Pakistan kind of being seen as like Indian agents, right? It is very much
yeah,
coded through a religion mindset, but this film makes it specifically on a nationalist sort of mindset, which obviously you cannot sort of take apart from religion. But it's interesting that it's mainly sort of seen as nationality as being an issue as opposed to religion.
right. And I think there's this. This is something that going to piss off people that listen to this. If that's you, I don't care. Is I'm personally a believer in pluralism, in secularism, in multiculturalism, whatever you want to call that, right? where the film doesn't take this now mainstream opinion in India where Islam is seen as this inherently foreign or inherently concept. You know, even if you consider like Islam in the subcontinent, it's not 100% someone else's interpretation. You know, Islam in the subcontinent was not 100% at the point of the sword, although that did happen. The tradition is where we get the spread and influence of Islam in India. It has its own mainstays and its own variety of doctrines in India, right? Even, you know, what you call the Salafi movement at a separate point has its own roots in Uttar Pradesh, right? So like Islam is its own diverse and deeply rooted tradition within India. That's, you know, I'm not here to say who's right, who's wrong. I'm just here to say like people have an entirely bass-acked historical way of looking at it. And I think for the film to kind of stick to national identity solely, one makes things incredibly simple for the story to progress a little more effectively, but also like it feels a lot more historically grounded for what it's worth.
Yeah, no,
Unless I'm off
you're
base, I
absolutely
don't
right.
know.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think, it's sort of portrayal of like Islam, and especially when comparing it to modern films. And I feel like I always have to like sort of like preface this by saying Indian films has gotten that bad to the point where we're kind of like praising this for like the most like stupidly mundane things. I know
Yeah,
that's like ridiculous, but yeah, the way this film sort of portrays Islam, it's not seen as like, oh, all the Muslims are the intolerant ones or they're like this reason. It's like it's not seen as more of like an affront to their religion. At least Veer kind of falls in love with Zara. That's not like what it's seen as. And really the only sort of like character who is a villain, while he is Pakistani and a Muslim, those are not the reasons for why he's a villain. He's a villain ultimately because he can't stand the fact that the woman he's going to marry was in love with someone else, right? And it's very much sort of seen through that lens as opposed to a lens as like, oh my god, I'm a Muslim and I'm a Pakistani, how dare this happen, right? I don't know.
yeah,
I
it's far
guess that
more
was kind of a
Shakespeare. No, it's more
thing.
Shakespeare. On.
Yeah, it's more Shakespearean in the way it's sort of seen.
And then I think another thing, because this may feel like a trite point, but like in today's very cynical, ironic, and just very jaded culture, right? Um, talking the context of Bollywood, right? Or even film in general, right? Where everything is about turning a profit, least common denominator, or like trying to reject or run away from sincerity and idealism. To have a film like this that's like so earnestly idealistic, so aggressively hard on its sleeve, right? It is that
Hmm.
is definitely a product of its time. It's definitely like, you can't, that kind of idealism is rooted in the conditions of when it came out. But it's so refreshing to us as like modern day subjects when we view it to even have a fictionalized embrace of the possibility of a better world, to have the fictionalized depiction of softer relations, that healing between two peoples who have been so fucking like by the pains of partition, right? Like
Yeah,
the
yeah, no,
the
I
subtext of that
fully,
cannot be lost on the audience.
absolutely, I understand what you're saying. It's very earnest and sincere, and it wears that on its sleeve, specifically with sort of the pain that I would argue the separation of Punjab has caused, but also with the hope that, they'll recognize that obviously their shared history, their shared culture, and the hope that, it can get better. It can, in fact, be solved, that it's not just doomed to just fight out this that India and Pakistan are not doomed to fight out this like everlasting, you know, battle between each other, for the benefit of, various imperialist powers, but rather they can ultimately figure out, the problems. They can ultimately solve and move forward and and get rid of the original sin that is the original sin of the subcontinent, which was partition.
100%.
It wear,
That's
and it wears
100%. Yeah.
it wears that on its sleeve, and I think that's one of the real reasons I love the film so much.
Right, and I think that's the thing about it, where there is a place for romanticism. There is a place for idea, even if, like, you have to adopt the kind of Gramscian optimism of the will, pessimism of the intellect to cope with where we're at in neoliberalism today. It helps to kind of lean into it periodically. It helps to at least keep that in the back of your mind, because there are things that transcend base cruelty and cold reality at times, and that contradiction of you know the kind of coldness of reality and the warmth of idealism, like that is kind of to the human experience, and that is something that I think Indian cinema has been exploring from its inception, right? I think we have a kind of cultural baggage about how do we portray emotionality, right? How do we express emotion? That's something that we struggle with as a people, which is why we're so dramatic in our personal lives, but also in how we depict it artistically, right? I think, like, there are very few outlets for expressing that. And that's where, like, these kind of like boundless displays of optimism, or these boundless displays of like faith in the human spirit, are necessary, especially in times like these today.
Yeah, and I think the film very much falls in line with the sort of tradition that Bollywood films have. It's sort of like the classical period and like the immediate aftermath of independence, where Bollywood films have always been sort of questioning the very contradictions that are present in Indian society, with obviously regards to poverty, misogyny, the patriarchy, sectarianism, but also partition, and I think this film kind of falls in line with that, which is exploring the contradiction that, like, what does it mean when the same people have been divided? What does that mean? Like, what does that entail when that, like, when those divisions are very much still present, even though it happens decades ago, and is very much still sort of causing a problem between two emerging sort of third world powers, right? And this film kind of falls in line with that tradition, which I think is another reason I like it. It's very much like I think you said earlier. Like, not only its music, its set design, its acting, it very much does harken back to like the classic Bollywood films. I really do appreciate that about it. I think overall, while I do have many issues or certain issues with the film. Not only is I think it is a bit too long. I think some of the pacing is a bit ridiculous. I do think the B plot at the courtroom does do way too much more than it needs to do. But I still ultimately I can't help but acknowledge that, in my opinion, this film is a masterpiece, and I think it is obviously not only the last great Yash Chopra film, but I'd also argue it is the most interesting Shah Rukh Khan performance. In the fact that it's a little bit more sort of laid back. It's a little bit more withdrawn, than we're used to. And I really sort of appreciate that about the film, and as well as the SRK's performance overall.
Right, because I think those drawbacks of the film are kind of what I'm Chopra style, just like these B plots that don't add up, these like very long run times, and this like kind of reliance on melodrama.
No, the reliance on melodrama is fine. It's just that I strongly do believe that whole B plot with Rani Mukherjee and Anupam Kher, it really does not work in the film, and it does feel like you could cut a good portion of it out.
I think you could too, but I think, like, with the film being released in Pakistan, I can see the justification for, let's at least have side characters to have some audience buy-in, but I think it could have been executed a lot better. It didn't need to be just. Um, let's see. I feel like we've really exhausted the outline on this one. Um, I
I'll
guess
just speak
here's a good
forever
quote.
more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what can we say other than like, it's a hood classic. I think it's a good place to start if you haven't explored Bollywood before. If looking for a kind of, and especially like if you're into like romantic films and you want something that kind of transcends the very simplistic attraction, right? And you want just like a very classic, almost like dated style of love that transcends our conventional trappings of it. It does posture towards that incredibly well, ways that I just don't think Indian cinema has been able to capture lately.
No,
And it's
absolutely.
for sure.
Yeah, I don't really think I could say anything more except watch it if you haven't. Uh, that's it. Yeah, you've listened to us talk about it for an hour, so please watch it.
Yes, yes. um, I guess if you like this movie, what are some recommendations for?
Well, I guess another sort of like romance, which can also be reread as like kind of a analogy for, India. Not so much as India and Pakistan, but more so much as India as a nation, as well as how sort of treated various sort of ethnic minorities. Dilse is another film, phenomenal. Although,
Mm,
politically, I think if you watch it, you understand what I'm saying. Like, you can't do have some problems with Mani Ratnam, who feels like he's like I like to call it an aggressive centrist in a lot of his views, and it comes across sort of as more political works, and it does come across in Dilse. But overall, Dilse is a wonderful film, phenomenal SRK performance, arguably the greatest soundtrack in all of the history of Bollywood, courtesy of Aaya. But that's another movie. I guess Bakiza is another film if you're looking for that melodramatic romance. 1972, directed by Kamal Amrohi. It's like considered to be in like the courtesan as well as the quote unquote Muslim social genre. Phenomenal film. Mina Kumari is amazing in it. I guess those are like the two films I would recommend, if you like this movie. But most of all, if you haven't seen this movie, watch Veer-Zaara. You're not gonna regret it. Wonderful film, wonderful performances, wonderful direction. Everybody's like working at their peak here. Great soundtrack. I really can't say enough.
and just an absolute treat for the eye. Spot on there.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, final rating out of 5. What would you give it?
4.5, 5 out of 5.
5 out of 5. I was gonna give it a 4.5 for sure.
No, it's just a 5 out of 5. Like, I mean, yeah, it is flawed. I'm not going to say that, but it's a masterpiece. I have to, like, I'm forced to acknowledge it every time I see it. It's absolutely phenomenal. 5 out of 5 for me.
I hear you there because I think like the point of art, and again, like everyone will disagree, and that's okay. I do think art should, even if it's not clear what that feeling is, it should do that. And for what it's worth, you will feel a lot.
And I think
That
it
cannot
reaches a
be
certain level
understated.
of absolutely, I think it reaches a certain level of the sublime to the point where I'm willing to overlook a lot of its flaws, that I'm just willing, well, it's just phenomenal. It's a masterpiece. So, yeah, 5 out of 5 for me.
Transcends the limitations of the medium to some extent.
Exactly. Although to be honest, I've never been a huge fan of like the star ratings because I feel like people kind of like pay attention to that more so than what you have to say about the film itself.
Of course, of course.
But just watch it. Great movie.
I can't say it better myself. Um, so with all that being said, Anand, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
No, not really. Subscribe to Greenhouse Gaslighting. Great podcast. Talk about great stuff. That's what I'll plug.
Appreciate that. I'm also going to encourage listeners follow at Decrepit Zoomer on x.com if you still use the site. And again, thanks for dear listeners. Thanks again for coming on, Anand. It's always a blast having you on. So, with all that being said, I'll have a link to the show and whatever in the show notes. God, how did I forget to do the outro? We'll see. We'll catch you on the next one, dear listeners. Take care.
See you.
जो बंदिशें थी जमाने की तोड़ आया हूँ मैं तेरे वास्ते दुनिया को छोड़ आया हूँ आया तेरे दर पर दीवाना आया तेरे दर पर दीवाना आया हो आया आया तेरा दीवाना आया तेरे दर पर दीवाना आया तेरे दर पर दीवाना तेरा दीवाना तेरा दीवाना तेरा दीवाना आया तेरे दर पर दीवाना आया तेरे दर पर दीवाना